And now the meditation on Shiva. Dhyaya nityam mahesham rajatagirinibham charu chandravatangsam ratna kalpojvalangam parushumargavarabhiti hastam prasannam padmasinam samantatstutamamaraganarvagakritim vasanam vishwadyam vishwabijam nikhilabhayaharam panchavaktram trinetram. I meditate on that Lord with 5 faces and 3 eyes. I meditate eternally on Him who is like a mountain of silver, shining as if His limbs are adorned with ornaments. He is the great Lord Mahesha, who is crowned Charu Chandra Vatangsam with a crescent moon. He holds in his upper left hand an axe. In his lower left hand, he is holding a deer representing the mind perfectly restrained. With his upper right hand, he assures fearlessness, and with his lower right hand, he offers boons. He is seated in the lotus posture, absorbed in the deepest samadhi. All about him, gods and demons and other beings are worshipping and hymning him. He is the ground of all reality, and the seed from which it springs forth. I meditate upon that Shiva, who is the destroyer of all fear. Nikhila bhayaharam panchavaktram trinetram. Karpura gauram karunavataram samsara saram bhujagendraharam sadavasantam hridayarvinde bhavam bhavani sahitam namami kailasa pirtasana madhya sangstam bhaktaischa nandhyadhivisevyamanam bhaktati davanalam aprameyam dhyayedu malingita vishwarupam dhyayedu malingita vishwarupam. I meditate upon that Shiva lingam, which is of the form, this universe. I meditate upon Shiva along with his consort Bhavani. He is the incarnation of all compassion, who is adorned with serpents. May this be an offering to him. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Maheshwararpanamastu. Namo Parvati Pataye Har Har Mahadeva. Good evening. So we've just now finished the puja to the Guru, and we've discussed how Guru Puja is like the first thing that we do in the context of tantric ritual worship. And right after that, we worship Ganesh, and we gave a few classes on that. I think about 3 in all on Ganesh. And these classes explore the role of the body in sadhana, which you just explored with Kuleshwari Devi. So thank you, Ma, for teaching that beautiful class. And you said something so beautiful, which is like, thank you all for showing up and doing the hard work of embodiment. The Swami Vivekananda in one place used to say, I know where the shoe pinches. It's a response to people who have been studying and learning spirituality for a long time, and yet don't seem to be able to integrate all the concepts that they've imbibed through their studies. So we can only attend so many lectures and read so many books before we realize that living spirituality is very different from a kind of learned, conceptual notion of the same. So Swami Vivekananda would say, I know where the shoe pinches. There's a lack of integration, assimilation, digestion. And so these kinds of practices, whether it's Hatha Yoga or Bhajana, Kirtana, Japa, and for this class, Pujana, these are all important practices to actually live according to what we usually learn. So we talked about Ganesh and the role of embodiment and why you can't really do anything without first getting the grace of the body. They say grace of God is very important. But more important, arguably, is the grace of one's own mind. It's like if you're a horse and God brings you to the water, unless you want to drink, very little can happen. So that's something Swami Brahmananda used to say. Like you could have the grace of God, you could have the grace of your guru, all of that. But if you don't have the grace of your own mind, that will be a problem. So you can say mind is another way of saying body. Body is an externalized form of the mind, and mind is an internalized form of the body. They're not two different things as per the Cartesian dualistic model. Rather, they're two expressions of one thing, prana. Prana, which is the parinamat, the first transformation of consciousness, according to the Kaula Sutra. In verse 4, we learn that this entire universe is nothing but prana. And importantly, we learn that prana verse 4 and 5 tells us that prana is nothing but consciousness. It's dynamic consciousness, if you will. So this prana, it manifests now as mind, now as body. So in one sense, the kind of philosophy that we do, that's hatha yoga in one sense, because you're doing poses, as it were, on the level of the mind. But that's only half the picture. And the other half is that we do poses on the level of the body too. And then when both not both, but when these two expressions of the one are fully harnessed, then we have something that looks like a wholesome integrated spirituality. So you need to get the grace of your own mind. And another way of saying that is you need the grace of your own body. Or rather, you need to be able to enter into the Mooladhara chakra before you can begin your ascent up the Shushumna Nadi. Insofar as the deities can be understood as expressions in the chakras, then it's very difficult to experience anything in puja until you first awaken Kundalini in the Mooladhara chakra, until you first enter into this hall. It's like the reception room, you know. And Ganesh, in one sense, he represents the body, but also in another sense, thinking of it like more realistically, more dualistically, beyond just the metaphor, he's like a gatekeeper of sorts. He's a bouncer, like the club bouncer. And sometimes I think of Jesus like this, you know, because he said, many of you will take my name, but then when the time comes, I'll say, I don't know who these people are, right? He said, you brood of vipers. They say, Lord, Lord, yet when the day of judgment comes, I shall say, I know them not. In Matthew, it gives us this warning. There are many people who profess to be spiritual, and in the name of spirituality, they do their commerce and whatnot. So it's almost like you go to the club, and you're like, I'm with that guy, and then Christ is like, never heard of him, don't know who he is, not with me, never met him before in my life. Anyway, so I imagine like Christ, you know, if you show up at the club, if you're in the brood of vipers, they'll be like, I, new number, who dis? I don't know, something like that. So Ganesh, like Christ, I imagine he's kind of like also a gatekeeper of sorts. He's actually one of the Dwara Devatas. We learned about this a long time ago that before you do puja, you worship the doorway deities. Dwara, door, Devata, you know, the gods and goddesses of the threshold, the doorway deities. And we learned that Ganesh, like the Kshetrapala Bhairav and Batuka Bhairav and the yoginis, Ganesh is one of these door guards, the doorkeepers. You can say it's Uchishta Ganesha or He Ramba Ganesha to distinguish this form of Ganesh from other forms of Ganesh. But I think just generally taking Ganesh to be one singular entity in all the various phases that we experience in him, he can be a sort of bouncer, and so you have to get the grace of the body. But another way of saying that is you have to get the grace of Ganesh before you can start doing any puja. He has to clear all obstacles. So we've already talked about that. We've talked about the worship of the Guru. We've talked about the worship of Ganesh. Now it's time to talk about the worship of Shiva. So having worshipped Ganesh, it's Shiva time. Hello, Colleen. Good to see. Your hair is different today. It's very nice, very vibrant. Jaima, Jaima. Good to see you. Bhairavi Nikila is there. Jaima, Veera, Nataji, Jaima, Jaima, Scotchy, Brandon G, Jaima, Asha, Jaima, Jaima, Asha, Danny G, Joanna, Jaima. And of course, Kuleshwari, thank you so much for the class again. Jaima, Jaima. Hello, Rohanji. Reina, good to see you, Ma. Reina with Ma is there. Good. And everyone else, welcome, welcome, welcome. So I'm just like looking at who I can see, but everyone, welcome, welcome. So, importantly, now we take up the worship of Shiva. And one thing you're going to notice about this puja, about this approach to ritual, is that Shiva is very prevalent in the Padati. He's worshipped not once, but at least 3 times in a very serious way. So Shiva gets 3 pujas because there are 3 forms of Shiva that in Kali Puja we worship. So the first form of Shiva is called Sadā-śiva, also interestingly known as Ardha Nareshwara. If you take the Tattva map, the 36 Tattvas of the tradition, you can say this Shiva, Sadā-śiva, corresponds to Tattva number 3. That is, we're counting from Shiva all the way down to Prithvi. So Shiva being Tattva number 1 and Earth, Prithvi being Tattva number 36. So if you go from 1 through to 36, what you end up getting is number 3 for Sadā-śiva. However, you can also count this the opposite way. You can take Earth as number 1 and Shiva as 36. In that case, he would be 34. In any case, whether Tattva 3 or 34, his role in the Tattva map is the perfect fusion of Shiva and Shakti. So Shiva is Tattva 1, Shakti is Tattva 2. Actually, there's a Tattva number 0, as you know, the 37th Tattva, which is Kali. Kali is that Sangata, that sexual union of Shiva and Shakti, prior to even consciousness and energy, which is a very philosophically rarefied concept. We don't need to go into that now. But the idea that this is a being, that this is a self-aware individual in whose mind the entire world is dreamt up, that idea appears in Shaivism. Of course, it's there in the Puranas, like Vishnu dreams the whole world. All of this is Vishnu's dream. Or all of this is Brahma's meditation. There's that idea too. And you can see Brahma in the Puranas, not Brahman, meaning the absolute non-dual pure consciousness, but rather Brahma. And I shouldn't say non-dual pure consciousness. The word Brahman is also used to imply the qualified non-dual pure consciousness and also the dualistic pure consciousness. So I think non-dualists do not have a monopoly on the word Brahman, though sometimes we can make it sound that way. But anyway, Brahman, the neuter term, Brahman means that absolute, which is beyond all name and form. Brahma, the masculine noun form, means that creator deity, the one who creates, maintains, and destroys the world, which is distinct from Brahman, Godhead and God, if you will. So Brahma in the Vedas, in the Puranas, is seen as the creator deity in one sense, and he has four heads. They say he has five heads, but then Shiva chopped off the fifth. So this idea of a four-headed Brahman, and by the way, this is very interesting archetypical metaphor, because the four heads of Brahma, what do they represent, do you think? Like just off the top of your head, if the four heads of Brahma were to represent anything, what do you think the most appropriate set of four things would be for the four heads of Brahma? Any guesses? Just for fun. This will make sense because it's important to think about why Shiva has five heads, why he has three eyes, why he's known as Sadā-śiva, like that. But we have to start with Brahma. You can't think of Shiva until you first understand something of Brahma, at least Shiva according to this particular conception of him. So why four heads? What do the four heads represent, do you think? Yeah, it's the four Vedas. And it's like just the most important thing in Vedic civilization are the Vedas. And Swami Vivekananda, this is so interesting, expanded our notion of what the word Veda means. You know, now if you say the Vedas, you have in mind these like four books, which are really a collection of hymns. So the first one, the eldest of the Vedas, is called Rik Veda. And in the Rik Veda, you get the Devi, Sutkam, and various other very beautiful hymns. Then you have the Samaveda, then the Yajur Veda. Yajur Veda is very important because in the Yajur Veda, we have the 100 names of Lord Shiva, we have the Shri Rudram, and in that Shri Rudram, we have the Ganana Antava Ganapate mantra. We also have Mahamrityunjaya mantra, Om Namah Shivaya. So Yajur Veda, the Veda of sacrifices, is very important to our um, Shaiva tradition. But then there's the Atharva Veda. Atharva Veda is like arguably the most tantric of the four Vedas because it has a lot of magic in it. It's a very humanistic Veda and it has a lot of black magic too, which is kind of interesting. So it's like the sorcery Veda. Yajur Veda is very lofty, kind of ritual oriented Veda. And Atharva Veda, of course, is a very like interesting set of hymns. But in any case, these four Vedas are the foundational literature, if you will, from which all the traditions like yoga and Sankhya and Mimamsa, both its Uttara and Purva forms, and of course Tantra, they all kind of rely on these Vedas. And these four Vedas can be seen as these four collections of hymns: Rik, Sama, Yajur, Atharva. However, by Veda, Swami Vivekananda says, is not meant merely these books. He says, by Vedas, no books are meant. Veda just means the eternal spiritual knowledge that anyone, anywhere can access through right perception. So a rishi in like the Himalayas and a rishi in Antarctica, theoretically, technically, have access to the same Veda. You know, because it's just like in the Akashic record, if you will, if you to put it another more modern way. So like that Veda just means spiritual data that's just in hearing with creation as a kind of vibration. But in any case, because these Vedas were codified at one point by Veda Vyasa into four books or four, let's say, works, you could say then Brahma has four heads because from the four heads he speaks into existence the four Vedas. Again, that's not a very technically accurate way of putting it because the Vedas exist even if Brahma doesn't exist. Think about it this way, like even if there wasn't God, there would be Veda. Isn't that such a beautiful idea? Because usually in most religions, what we have is this idea of God who speaks the truth to some prophet, and then that prophet records the truth. And so what you have at the core of most religions is a prophet with a holy book inspired by God. But if there wasn't God, then there wouldn't be the prophet and there wouldn't be the holy book. But not so with ancient Vedic civilization. Here, even if there wasn't God, even if there were no prophets, there would still be holy knowledge. There would still be the Veda. Isn't that beautiful? There's actually a book. Myself haven't read it, but I've seen it quoted a lot. And it's, I think, kind of interesting book. It's called American Veda by Philip Gold or something like that. Do you know what I'm talking about? I myself haven't read it, but it tracks the journey of Hinduism here in America, like throughout the ages. And you can imagine it starts with like Emerson and Thoreau and all those like 1800s American transcendentalists, you know? In fact, Emerson, one of the greatest proponents of Vedanta before Swami Vivekananda came here to America, he has a poem called Brahma, actually. He was very inspired by the Bhagavad Gita. He read the Upanishads. He actually translated parts of the Bhagavad Gita, interestingly. But, you know, he has a poem called Brahma, but he means Brahman, I think. So it's kind of interesting. So anyway, Brahma is the creator deity, and the Vedas exist separately. The Vedas in here as part of creation, and Brahma, all he does is he speaks them into not into existence, but maybe into manifestation. So they exist in a kind of avyakta form as pure nada or pure resonance in reality. And then Brahma, he comes along and he's in one sense the Adi Jiva. In one sense, he's the first being. Like prior to Brahma, there are no beings as of yet. See, there is God in the sense of Godhead. Like Vishnu here isn't a being. Vishnu is being in and of itself, maybe. So Brahma emerges from Vishnu's navel, if you will, and he's like Vishnu's self-reflexive ability to say, "Oh, I'm this. Look at me. Oh my God, what's this? What's this?" And he's looking around, and all he sees is undifferentiated potential. Like nothing exists yet except Brahma. And so, what do you do when there's absolutely nothing but you? Actually, naturally, you'll meditate. So, Brahma is like not only the Adi Jiva, he's in one sense also the Adi Yogi. Of course, these are Adi Yogi, these are terms that will be applied to Shiva later. Jaima. But Brahma, as Adi Jiva, naturally, he's the world's first meditator. And that's all that he could think to do. When there's nothing in this universe, naturally, he's going to go inward. So the creation of the universe begins with Brahma's tapasya. Brahma sitting and entering into deep meditation. Sometimes you'll see him depicted with a rosary, interestingly enough. So the creator of the universe doesn't create through action, but rather through contemplation, through meditation. This entire world is the contemplation in the mind of the creator deity, if you will. So Brahma meditates, and as he meditates, like the rishis of old, in fact, he's the prototypical rishi. He perceives with super sensuous spiritual insight the Vedas. He just intuits these spiritual truths. And then he speaks them. And so this world, in some sense, is a creation of word, and the world is based on the Veda. So you can think of Veda as logos, and and again, don't think of it that way because actually I'm not qualified to speak on logos. Like this is something also that is kind of my pet peeve when people from different traditions act as if they're authorities on other traditions that they actually have never been initiated into or know very little about. So like while we Hindus can say, oh, this is what logos means, I'm not sure that the Eastern Orthodox practitioners would agree with us. Like I think they have very technical uses of the word logos, like an understanding of Greek that we don't have. So we should be careful. I think sometimes we have this tendency as Hindus, to just kind of like conglomerate everything and be like, oh, that's kind of like this or that's kind of like that. That's good, that's commendable, but sometimes it can be a little presumptuous. So I'm not going to say it's like logos, but in the sense that if you take logos to mean blueprint or like fundamental plan or something like that, in the Vedas, in one sense, represent the unmanifest plan. Whereas when Brahma speaks it, then he brings it into manifestation. Now it becomes manifest. So this would be like the word that was with God, the word that was God, in a sense. So the Vedas, again, are not books. They're like vibrations, and there are four distinct vibrations, and they come from Brahma's four faces. That's why he has four faces. Now, in some versions of this, through his mind, he creates four mind-born sons also, like the Sanat Kumaras, and he teaches them the Vedas. And also sometimes he teaches Narada the Vedas, like that. So Brahma is often seen as a teacher when you see him anthropomorphically depicted, if ever, you see him with like a big beard sometimes. He looks like a rishi, like a seer, like an ancient sage, like that. So he teaches people. He's the first Brahmana. In fact, the name Brahmin can be traced back to this section of the Vedas called the Brahmanas, obviously in reference to Brahma, the one who speaks them into existence. So here's Brahma, and he's just kind of the first one in the world, and he speaks the Vedas, and the world is created in Brahma's mind through the plan of the Vedas. So he's the creator god. Interestingly, the Hindu tradition has an uncomfortable relationship with the creator god. Whereas maybe in Christianity we worship the creator god, in Hinduism we think he's full of shit. Like in many of the Puranic stories, he's humiliated. He lies. So in one sense, the world is not what it appears to be. So to capture that reality, we kind of put Brahma down a little bit. He weaves a web of lies, or he's deeply deluded, and like is being implied here in the chat. Meghnama is saying, like, yeah, actually there are all these stories about him also having deeply problematic leelas. Like for instance, in one case, he manifests a mind-born daughter, Usha, the dawn, and then he falls in love with her, and he, is overpowered with this incestuous desire to mate with her, so he starts chasing her around everywhere. And so Shiva, who sees this transgression, decides to do something about it. So Shiva takes his Bhairava form and comes and chops off Brahma's head, thereby freeing him from his self-aggrandizing, gratification-seeking lusts. And then he's finally able to see Usha for what she is, not something to be used as a means to an end, not a sex object, but the divinity to be worshipped. Right? Like that realization comes to Brahma. So the creator deity is kind of fucked up actually. Like that's one idea. And so there are many stories like that where Brahma is somewhat problematic. Like in one version of the story, Vishnu and Brahma are trying to measure Shiva. So Brahma goes all the way down to the center of, Vishnu goes down as a boar to find the bottom of Shiva, and Brahma jumps on his swan and flies up to find the top of Shiva. Neither of them can do it. Because in the Shiva Purana, this Jyotirlinga, this fire lingam, is Ananta and Anadi, endless and beginningless. So Vishnu comes back defeated. He's like, I could not find the beginning. Brahma, though, decides to play not a prank, but decides to lie. He's on his way up, and then he sees a Ketaki flower falling down. And then he says, Hey, Ketaki flower, I know. You must bear false witness to this fact that I went to the top. I'm going to tell Vishnu, because I can't find the top. It looks like there is no top. So I'm going to tell Vishnu that I found the top because they have a contest to see which one is the better god, and you're gonna bear witness for me. You're gonna bear false witness. And the Ketaki flower is like, yeah, whatever. So they both come back down, and Brahma says to Vishnu, well, guess what? I got to the top. In fact, not only that, but I used this here flower to worship Shiva at the top of the lingam. See? What do you say? And then the flower is like, yes, yes, we were there. He used me to worship Shiva. And Vishnu was like, okay, I guess I stand defeated. You win. And at that point, a voice comes from the pillar of fire, cursing Brahma. And so cursing the Ketaki flower. The curse is, Brahma, you shall never be worshipped. And in truth, in India, there's like maybe one or two Brahma temples around, right? Very rarely is Brahma worshipped. There's no like devotee of Brahma. I would say Christians are all devotees of Brahma, but in one sense, there's no devotee of Brahma. And also, not only that, Shiva forbids the use of the Ketaki flower in worship. I'm not sure what that flower is in English, but there's a particular flower that Shiva doesn't like. Yeah, right? There's only one place, Vanchakama is saying, in Rajasthan. Anyway, so Brahma is not worshipped generally because of these Puranic stories. And yes, in Bali, in Indonesia, in Thailand, in fact, in Thailand, you'll see images of the Buddha with four heads. Buddha, but as Brahma, or Brahma as the Buddha. So there are forms of like Southeast Asian tantric traditions, like the Sri Vijaya and what's the name? I'm sorry, I'm blanking. There were two big kingdoms in Southeast Asia. These are Chola dynasty kingdoms. So, of course, they are tantric traditions that were brought into Southeast Asia by Indian explorers and Indian flotillas. One of them was called Sri Vijaya, but I forgot the name of the other kingdom. But these kingdoms were, of course, Hindu. And then later they became Buddhist. And when you can see Angkor Wat and things like that in Cambodia, you see that kind of imagery. But yeah, I think you're right. You're absolutely right. Vanchika Devi, like outside of sorry, Meghnama, outside of India, like Brahma might enjoy a little bit more worship. In fact, I would say, like, again, like Christianity, they worship God as the creator, as the one who creates souls, as the one who creates the world, as the one who reveals knowledge. Basically, the description of Brahma is almost one to one the conception that many people have of the Father. This like cosmic patriarch. Ah, thank you, Majapahit. Thank you. There's a Sri Vijaya. I was saying Mohenjo. Don't know what is it. Majapahit. Thank you. Yeah. So these two kingdoms in Southeast Asia, of course, popularized the worship of Hinduism, Buddhism, along tantric lines usually. Anyway, I digressed a little bit. So Brahma, he's cursed. He's cursed by Shiva not to be worshipped. He's usually humiliated in many stories. He's seen as a problematic character. So the creation of the world is not so special. In fact, where did Brahma learn how to create the world? From the Vedas, which eternally resonate in reality, in Godhead, if you will. So this is the myth of Brahma, the foundation myth of much of the Puranic world. So now Brahma, he creates his four sons. That doesn't work out. They don't want to have any progeny and like that. So there's this whole Leela, this whole drama of how the world came to be. But Brahma, in one sense, is the father of the world. However, this myth gets supplanted in the Shaiva world because the idea is that now we're in a different yuga. We're in the Kali Yuga. And in the Kali Yuga, the Vedas don't really work like how they used to. We don't really have the aptitude, like our ancestors, to do worship along Vedic lines. So if we chant Vedic mantras, we won't get any benefit out of them because we won't really know how to properly chant them. After all, it's in a different kind of Sanskrit. Like Vedas are rendered in an old and archaic form of Sanskrit. Sometimes I have no idea what's being said in these Vedas because these are words, and not only are they words, but grammatical structures that are like wholly like alien to me. So even if you read Panini and studied the Ashtadhyayi and stuff like that, even if you knew Sanskrit, you might still be a little bit perplexed by the Vedas. They're in an old form of Sanskrit. So you don't really know what the the proper pronunciation might be, like the intonations, they're called swaras, the way that you chant, going up and going down to the kind of invocatory formula of the Vedas is something that we have done in India a very good job of preserving. But the claim is that in the Kali Yuga, they don't really bear fruit anymore. Back then it said you can just start. The opening word of the Rik Veda is Agni. So Agni Mile Purohita. Like just by chanting that, you should be able to light a fire. But now we chant that, nothing seems to happen. You still need your little lighter or some kind of fire starter or something. So back then, those mantras were really potent because they were made for that time, the Satya Yuga. So the claim that we get in some religions is as follows. This religion is really, really great because it's really, really old. Right? That's one of the ways that you can say your religion is better, by saying it's really, really old. And yet other religions seem to make a claim that's just the opposite. They say, no, our religion is really, really good because it's really, really new. So Tantra falls into that latter category. So here we're saying this stuff is better because it's updated. The Vedas won't work for us anymore in this Kali Yuga. They might have been good in the Satya Yuga, but now if you try to do it, it'd be very difficult. You don't know how to properly intone the mantras, and you don't have the things anymore. Soma is no longer available. The technique for preparing Soma has been lost. Like, we don't know how to actually arrange a yagya. We can try, but again, we might not know what we're doing because that kind of level of refinement is no longer available. Given that we're so body conscious, given that we have to consume food through the mouth as opposed to how our rishis could consume food in other ways, like all of that. So you find these claims made all throughout the tantric world, and you find it, of course, in the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna sometimes calls people out for trying to attempt difficult Vedic sadhanas. So he would say, like to Ishan, for instance, like, that's not going to be a helpful sadhana for you. This is the Kali Yuga. Sri Ramakrishna would say time and time again, and therefore those sadhanas are no longer appropriate. So you get this narrative in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you get it in like the Narada kind of bhakti world, you get it obviously in the Tantras, which are specifically designed for the Kali Yuga. But the basic claim is this: the Tantras are a Vedic revivalism movement. That's kind of the claim. Abhinavagupta makes this claim. Like, the Vedas don't work anymore, so don't worry. Yeah, you need a re-up. The re-up of the Molly at the rave, like, this is it. Like, you need a computer update, and this is it. And so it's the same stuff that you heard in the Vedas, except updated to fit a new generation of practitioners. So the tantric period maybe emerges like somewhere in the, again, dating is a very dicey game here, but you can say maybe somewhere in 500 AD. So it's kind of new, 500, 600 AD. You start seeing your first fully fledged tantric text. You could say, these are specifically designed for the Kali Yuga. So now you get the image of Shiva, who, like Brahma, has more than one head, who like Brahma represents these streams of knowledge with each of these heads. That's why in the mantra we just chanted, you get the phrase Pancha Vaktra. Vaktra means mouth or face. So five. Pancha, five. Vaktra, he who has five heads. Now it's argued that there are five streams of the tantric world. So Tantra has five different schools. Not really, but you can say five primordial schools. So you can see there's the Vama Vaktra, there's Aghora Vaktra, there's the Sadyojata Vaktra, there's Tatpurusha Vaktra, Ishana Vaktra, like that. So all of these various things, Tatpurusha, Ishana, Sadyojata, Vama, and Aghora, these five different heads of Lord Shiva. And they, each and every one of them, transmit spiritual knowledge in the form of the agamas and tantra. So Panchavaktrebhya agamat. From the five heads of Lord Shiva come the agamas. So in fact, if you want to define tantra or define the agamas in a classical way, you would say this: Tantra is that revelation which comes from the five faces of Lord Shiva. Now, there are two views on this. According to one view, Shiva reveals this because it's in Shiva. So this would be called Paroshaya Vidya, knowledge that comes from a being, from God. So this is a properly religious claim. There is God, whose name is Shiva, and that God reveals unto us this divine wisdom. However, I think a slightly more refined claim would be it's still Aporoshaya Vidya. Like, it's still not Shiva who reveals this, it's Shiva who learns this, dare I say it, like Brahman, from himself. And by himself here, I mean Brahman, from the absolute pure impersonal reality. And then from that reality, Lord Shiva, in the form of Sadā-śiva, in the form of the five-faced Shiva, then reveals it as Tantra, as Agama. So it's almost like I'm a baby bird in the nest, and mom is like chewing something from me and then spitting it in my mouth. It's exactly like that. The way that a bird might feed its children, like that, Shiva has realized this. After all, he's absorbed in the absolute. So Vedas are nothing to him. He's mastered them all. And having realized the Veda, the eternal wisdom by which no book is meant, then he, with his five heads, with his five mouths, speaks it into manifestation. And that's what we're learning together now. Okay, so that's a nice way of thinking about it. Like everything we're learning together now, insofar as we're studying Tantra and its theoretical and practical application, we're learning about the revelation that forever exists in reality prior to all gods and goddesses, and yet we're learning about it in the way that Lord Shiva has interpreted and revealed it unto us. Interpreted for and revealed it unto us. Nice idea. So he has five heads. See, it's almost like a, haha, Brahma, you had four heads? Well, you had five, but then our Shiva chopped off your fifth. And you know our Shiva? He has five heads. And five is better than four. So fuck you, Brahma. Shiva is better. So you can see like a kind of sectarian claim is being made here. A kind of supplanting of Brahma without necessarily supplanting the foundation myth. The myth remains the same. It's just you swap out Brahma for Shiva, but you do change the attitude now. So where Brahma is seen as the unliked, sort of unpopular creator, here Shiva is seen as the destroyer. And his Veda, his revelation has come to destroy the illusion that Brahma created. In fact, in the Puranas, Brahma and Shiva are like arch nemesis. Not really. Shiva couldn't care less. But Brahma usually doesn't like Shiva because Brahma's mission is to propagate life ad infinitum. He's Prajapati. He's Daksha. He wants to build. Whereas Shiva, it's not that he wants to destroy, it's that he doesn't fit into any of the institutions or structures that Brahma builds. So like that, Brahma has a problem with Shiva. And so there are all these tensions that we find in the Puranas between the two of them. So Brahma is the unpopular, as it were, creator of the world who reveals the Veda, which is of course wonderful. For that we must be grateful. But Shiva is the very beloved, very popular God as destroyer who comes to give wisdom that will render, render this illusion an illusion, or rend asunder, if you will, this structure, this limitation that we find ourselves in. So Shiva, as the five-headed god, I think you can't quite get away from the primordial Brahma, four-headed god myth, you know. Okay, so he has five heads and he has three eyes. Obviously, that's a reference to an early hymn to Lord Shiva. You find in the Yajurveda. It's there also in the Rig Veda. The idea that he's Triambakam. He has three eyes. And the third eye obviously represents Advaita, or the two resolved into one. So three, the Trika, has many meanings, of course, in the tradition. The transcendent, the immanent, the transcendent immanent. Sattva, Rajas, Tamas, like that. It's got all these various connotations. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep. So you can think of it as three in one. But you can also think of it as the one beyond the two. Dvandvatitam. See, that which is beyond dvandva, beyond duality. So Shiva is Advaita, he's non-dual, and in that sense, his third eye is quote unquote open, because it's open to the oneness of all things. It's a metaphorical eye, if you will. One's inner eye, a spiritual eye. So he has three eyes and five heads. So the final line of that dhyana mantra, which we're using for this first Shiva puja, is Pancha Vaktram Trinetram. I meditate upon that Lord with five heads and three eyes. And hopefully now you can see why. So if we think of Shiva in this way, as seated in lotus posture, absorbed in meditation, with either one or five heads, with three eyes, almost always you'll see him with three eyes. If we think of him that way, we are thinking of Sadā-śiva. Okay, so that's the point I've been trying to make, actually. It's been taking me quite a while to make this point. But the point I want to make is the first time you worship Shiva in our Padati, it's as Sadā-śiva. And that makes sense because Sadā-śiva is arguably the first form of Shiva that's important to the Shaiva tradition. I don't know that's, I'm not sure that's true because Rudra obviously is prior to Shiva. But there's some debate as to what Rudra has to do with Shiva. Is Rudra maybe more like Bhairava? In any case, we don't start worshipping Bhairava or Kali until a bit later. In the beginning, when Shaivism is founded as a standalone tradition called Shaiva Siddhanta, it might have drawn from a lot of the Atimargism and maybe Kapalika traditions that might have existed prior to its inception. But in any case, putting that aside for now, this is the first absolute monistic principle of the Shaiva world, Sadā-śiva. The word Sada means eternally, always. The word Shiva means blessing. So Sadā-śiva means eternally a blessing, you know. So that's the name, Sadā-śiva, eternally. And eternity, of course, here means he's beginningless, he's endless, he's the absolute monistic principle, maybe even monotheistic principle. He is God who creates, maintains, and destroys. And we studied that text some time ago from the Rauravagama. Remember, it was called the Shiva Jnana Bodha. I do intend to return to it. And there in the first verse, very first verse, it says, Asmat Prabhuharaha, and therefore the Lord is Shiva. Why is the Lord Shiva? Because he is the destroyer. And the one who destroys is the one who reabsorbs. To reabsorb means you must be the source from which something emerged. Otherwise, how could you destroy it? Unless you created it, you wouldn't be able to destroy it. Unless you emitted it, you wouldn't be able to reabsorb it. And because Shiva is the destroyer, he must also be the creator. And therefore, he is the creator, maintainer, destroyer par excellence. Asmat Prabhuharaha. Hara, Shiva, is God. is Prabhu, is God. But by Shiva, in the imagination of the Shaiva Siddhantika, they imagine this guy, Sadā-śiva, 5 heads, 3 eyes, seated in meditation posture. So most of the time, let me show you my phone case. I have it. This fella, this guy is Sadā-śiva. You see, so this is like a very popular form of Shiva. He's seated in meditation. Now he's only got one head here. And so the tradition of having 5 heads kind of fades away after a while. You still see it in some temples. And by the way, you can see lingams with 5 heads on it. If you've ever seen one of these, it's really cool. It's a lingam carved with faces. It's like one, two, three, four, and there's like a fifth one on top. And there's a whole thing about like a sixth underworld head, the Adho Mukha, like that. It's like you can really get into a lot regarding the faces. But I think these days in modern Shaivism, I don't know when this shift happened, we just kind of jettison the idea of 5 heads and we just have this one-headed rishi with jata, usually wearing a brahmana's upanaya, sacred thread, seated, usually depicted as wearing tiger skin or deer skin, or sometimes elephant skin, and he's seated. So he's a wild man. He's covered in animal skins. His hair is long and matted. Sometimes he has a beard. Often he doesn't, because he's beyond masculinity. So I think, okay, here's the point I want to make. When he has a beard, you get the idea that, oh, this is a man. Just from our like kind of like gendered ideas of biology, we're like, oh, if something has a beard, it's a man. But that's not true, actually. Some women have beards and some men don't. Like you can't say like, oh, if it's a male body, it'll therefore have a beard. But that's, I think, in our popular imagination, that's kind of the idea that if it has a beard, that's a masculine feature or something like that. So when Shiva has a beard, we're emphasizing his masculinity. But notice in Sadā-śiva, usually you find that he has a very effeminate face, like a Buddha's face or something. And I imagine that's influenced by 2nd century, 3rd century Gupta period art. Don't quote me on this. My feeling is that the artwork that depicts Shiva, it's very much like Gupta period, like Buddhist kind of imagery. You can see his face is like Buddha's face. Big forehead depicting intelligence, beautiful eyebrows, like a very royal nose, like that. And this idea of deep peace, is very calm and absorbed, and that like smile, very slight smile, like the smile of a baby sleeping, like that. Um, yeah, and I think Meghna, you're right. And as an artist, right, Meghna, you would know, like, especially you're a specialist in this. It's kind of hard to show the 5 heads. In fact, I used to put a picture on the screen whenever I talked about Shiva's 5 heads. It's a picture from a temple that I like. And in that picture, there are 5 heads, but they're all just like next to each other. Kind of like Ravana. When you see Ravana depicted, it's like many heads next to each other, like that. But you can't really, as Meghna Ma is pointing out, you can't really get the idea of like looking in multiple directions. Because one looks that way and one looks this way and one looks this way. So I think it's implied. Like you're seeing one head because you're looking at him straight on. But actually there's one head looking here, one head looking there, one head looking behind, and one head looking up. Or if you want, an additional head looking down like that, which is an interesting idea. So you have this idea of Shiva who has 5 heads, 3 eyes, but nowadays just with one head. But he doesn't have a beard. Usually he's depicted without a beard. Not always. I shouldn't say usually because nowadays there's so many different art styles and I can't make this statement anymore. But at least when I was growing up, and maybe this is more true of South India, most of the time when I saw images of Shiva, it'd be very rare to see him with a beard. True, as you go up north, sometimes you tend to see more bearded Shivas. But I think that's because Shaiva Siddhanta's special stronghold was in Tamil Nadu. Of course, in many places you have Shaiva Siddhanta, and Kashmir was a very fully fledged tradition. Who knows where some of the great masters of the tradition might have lived? Some say in Kashmir. In any case, in South India, when you see Sadā-śiva, he's usually beardless and he has this Buddha-like face, and usually like his hips are very shapely, almost like a woman's hips. So you get the idea that we have here a kind of androgyne, if you will. Right? And in one sense, you can depict this as Ardha Narishwara. You can actually draw a line down the middle, and you can say, look, half is Durga, half is Parvati with the lion, and the other half is Shiva with the bull. And so you get the masculine and feminine principles reconciled. It's one. But sometimes you don't even need to go that far. You don't even to actually like obviously say this half Parvati, half Shiva. It's already implied. Once you look at Shiva with his beardless, effeminate face and with his round hips, and you see him seated, but also paradoxically with no breasts, with kind of just like a male, what looks to be like a male body, you see him in a kind of androgynous sort of way. Like he's like the fool in the tarot, if you will. You're not quite sure where on the gender spectrum this being is. So he's the primordial being, and as such, he is the primordial androgyne. He's either Shiva or Shiva. Both mean male, female, something beyond either of those two. So he's Sadā-śiva. And if you look on the Tattva map, Sadā-śiva is Tattva number 3 or Tattva number 34. But importantly, that Tattva number 3 is the fusion of tattvas number 1 and 2, Shiva and Shakti. And not only that, he's the primordial being, the first fella in whose mind this entire universe appears. And from a cultural, historical point of view, he's like the first form of Shiva that is worshipped in the Shaiva tradition. So it makes sense then that before we do any puja, having already worshipped the Guru and having already worshipped Ganesh, it makes sense now to worship this foundational deity, if only culturally and historically. Like our allegiance to Sadā-śiva cannot be overstated, given that the entire tantric world rests, I would argue, on the Shaiva Siddhanta ritual foundation at least. If not theological and philosophical foundation, at least ritual foundation. Kundalini, that term comes from Shaiva Siddhanta. Chakras, Shaiva Siddhanta. Like all of that stuff that would later appear in Vaishnava Tantra and Jain Tantra and all the various other forms of Tantra that we find, historically, it's kind of undeniable that like it was there maybe in Shaiva Siddhanta historically first. And so like if anything, we're just celebrating where we came from. You know, we're just honoring Shaiva Siddhanta and its ritual technology. So that's why I think Shiva is worshipped first here in this Sadā-śiva form. That being said, the dhyana mantra that we're going to use to visualize Lord Shiva, the one that I chanted in the beginning of this talk, is from the Pashupati Ashtakam, the eight stanzas or 8 verses to Lord Shiva as the master of wild beasts. So Pashu means beasts. Pati means Lord. So here's Pashupati, the Lord of wild beasts, which you know is a very ancient name for Shiva. That's why he's the wild man, but by man I mean the wild androgyne, with his like wild hair, with his animal skins. He has no real clothes. Of course not. He wouldn't be in a marketplace where he could buy a nice dhoti, you know. He has to make his own clothes from elephant skins and tiger skins and deer skins. And he eats out of like coconut bowls or skull bowls. Again, very I don't want to use the word tribal because that's kind of pejorative sometimes, but I like the word autochthonous. So very autochthonous imagery. And he's living out in the wild. So he's like a mountain man actually, or a mountain androgyne. And he is typically depicted with animals near him. So at the very least, he's seated on a deer skin or a tiger skin mat, showing his proximity to that animal world and his conquest of it. But also, there's a cow near him, bull, Nandi. And not always just Nandi. Sometimes you'll see a tiger or some kind of scorpion. I remember when I was a child, the picture that we had, one of the big pictures. Of course, mostly it was lingams in our household, but there was one big picture. And when I say it, mostly it was lingams in our household. Actually, everyone in the household, their name was Lingam. Selvalingam, my father's name was Sodhilingam, his father's name was Vaitalingam, his father's name was Nagalingam, like that. So there are a lot of lingams in the household, both in the genealogy sense and also in the symbol sense. But there's one picture of Shiva that I especially loved. And this was the Sadā-śiva. Shiva seated, beardless, in deep meditation. And how I used to be so enraptured and so enthralled by that photo. He's my first hero. I'm like, whatever he's having, I want some of that. And I would just stare at this photo. And one thing I really liked about it was Shiva was sitting on his tiger skin mat. And to his right was Nandi, the bull. And there was the Ganga sort of flowing to his left, like Gomukh or something. And in front of his tiger skin mat were all the poisonous animals. There was like a snake with its head reared and its hood flared. There was a scorpion, and there was a spider, and there was a centipede. Like all the scary bugs that you see in the Himalayas. And the centipedes there are scary. And all these animals are there, and they're all kind of like praying to him, you know? They look like they're about to attack. They're all raising their like mandibles and whatnot, but they're hymning him. And he's perfectly unbothered by snakes and centipedes and spiders and scorpions and whatnot. And his eyes were half closed in that divine ecstasy we usually find him in, Someshwara. So that Lord Shiva is known as Pashupati because of his mastery over wild forces, mastery over beasts, his love for animals, and because animals love him very much. So Pashu means domestic animal. That's interesting. Pashu means like cattle, right? So he's the lord of domestic animals. But he's also, this is important, Mrigendra, the lord of wild animals. So when we say Pashupati, we don't just mean that he is the cattle master, like Jesus tending to his flock. That too, we are the Pashu, we are his cattle. So you get that kind of almost Christian like flock imagery. But I think importantly, even prior to that, even prior to this like cattle notion, you get this idea of just a person who's at one with nature, who is so non-violent that no animal will harm him. And there is even the lamb and the tiger will become like babes at his feet or something. Like there's a line in the Bible, I forget it now, but it's like how actually even the wild animals become tame around a person who is truly peaceful. So Shiva, bedecked in animal skins, surrounded by various poisonous animals, who is perfectly at home in the mountains, in the woods, who is the Lord of all wild forces. This is Pashupati. And the Dhyana mantra that we're using for our worship of Lord Shiva is from the Pashupati Ashtakam. Maybe next week I'll show you the whole hymn, but we just use the Dhyanam, just the first part of the hymn. But if you want, you can chant the rest of it. So Pashupati, Lord of wild beasts, Ashtakam, 8 verses. So the 8 verses to the Lord of wild beasts. So we're just using that in order to visualize Sadā-śiva. This is the first time Shiva is worshipped in the puja. But it's not the only time he's worshipped. He's worshipped again later as Bhairava. So after we worship Kali, and we finish with the worship of Kali's Avarana Devatas, her Parivara, her, what do you call it, her Mandala retinue, if you will. Having worshipped Kali's emanations, then you worship Bhairava. Now, some people do this the other way around. They worship Bhairava, then they worship Kali's emanations. I've seen it done both ways. But in our ritual book, in our Padati, you'll see that actually we do Shiva after Kali, and then we do the Mandala. Sorry, we do Kali, Mandala retinue, and then we do Shiva. Okay, so now Shiva, in this second form, is called Bhairava. So this form maybe is a bit more at home in the Kaula kind of traditions that we practice. This is Shiva in his fierce form. This might have more to do with Rudra actually. So here you have Bhairava, and Bhairava here importantly is seen as Ma's consort, but who is non-different from Ma. So this is, I think, kind of like a mysterious thing. The Bhairava that we're talking about here might not be Shava-rupa Shiva. Do you know, like the guy who's like a corpse? Like there you can see there's Shiva. Pure white, like that. Can you see? He's white color usually. Spatika, some say he shines like a Himalayan quartz crystal. So that Lord who is white as jasmine, to borrow a phrase from Mahadevi Akka, he's lying like this, like Shava, like corpse, like that. That's not necessarily Bhairava. I mean, yes, we can say it's Bhairava. I usually do. But by Bhairava, we actually mean a form of Shiva that is identical to Ma, that you can't really separate from Ma. So when you worship Ma, you have to worship Bhairava. But in one sense, Bhairava is not depicted there in the image. Now, is that a mind-blowing thought? Because we usually think, oh, like it's Ma and Bhairava. You can't have Ma without Bhairava. So whoever she's standing on, that must be Bhairava. But not necessarily. And sometimes, and in fact, this is one of the reasons I got banned on YouTube, the image that I used was Ma sitting on Bhairava, sitting on Shiva. No, sorry, sitting on Bhairava, standing on Shiva. So there are some images. And Anandamayi Ma actually had one murti like this made at her ashrama, where it's Ma in sexual union with Bhairava. So Bhairava sometimes is depicted as lying down. Yeah, and they're in sexual union. So she's like entering Bhairava, but she's standing on Shava-rupa Shiva. So there are two fellas there, interestingly. Shiva as a corpse and Shiva as Bhairava. What a beautiful idea. So when we first worship Shiva, we worship him as Sadā-śiva, as Pashupati, as the Lord of wild beasts, that primordial form of Shiva that was so sacred to the Shaiva Siddhanta, which you might even say is a kind of Ardha Narishwara, like primordial Jiva, Adi Yogi figure. But then the second time we worship Shiva in the Padati, oh my God, I'm sorry, there are actually 4 worships of Shiva. I don't need to get into that now. But the second time we worship Shiva is actually going to be this Bhairava form, which is not always depicted. Oh yes, and Meghnama is shown here in the chat. You can see that from, yeah, that's exactly it. So is there an artist here, Ma, that I can cite? Because I want to show this image, but I'm careful not to do it unless I can cite the artist. But anyway, you can see in the chats, Meghnama has shared an artwork. But oh, sorry, thank you. I didn't see that. Huh. Let me see. Oh man, I can't quite make it out. But yeah, so
The picture is reversed. That's why. It's like
I
the
see.
mirror image.
Oh, thank you, Shiva Subramaniam. Oh, a South Indian artist, interestingly. I thought it would be a Bengali artist, but oh yeah, you're right. It is reversed. But anyway, let me show you. So this picture here. So you'll see here's Bhairava. And usually when she's depicted with Bhairava, she is in sexual union with Bhairava. It's not that she's standing on Shiva, like desiring to have sexual union with him. Usually she's always in sexual union with him. You can't have Kali who is not in sexual union with Bhairava. There's always Sangata in the metaphysical sense of Shiva and his consort. So now you can imagine these are in the Sahasrara Chakra, Kali and Shiva. They're never actually separate. But then there's this perceived separation where she seems to be parted from Bhairava, and now she longs to return into sexual union, into sexual embrace with Bhairava. So this is Kundalini Shakti as understood to be separated from her consort, if even such a thing can be imagined. Haven't you heard, in the Ramayana, there's this idea that Ravana never actually kidnapped Sita? Haven't you heard this idea? It's a beautiful idea that like Sita is too pure for Ravana to even touch. So Ravana couldn't actually kidnap Sita. Instead, he kidnapped Sita's Chaya. He kidnapped Chaya Sita, Sita's shadow. And so the whole quest, the whole like siege is a journey to get Sita's shadow back. not Sita, because Sita is too pure to be kidnapped. So it's something like that, where like Shava Rupa Shiva is a seeming separation. When Kundalini Shakti comes into the Muladhara, it seems like she's parted from him. Yes, it seems like they've come apart, but never. In actuality, metaphysically speaking, absolutely, they are Sada Sangatam. They're always one. They're always united. They're Yamala, the word is. They're always in union. What is the phrase? Naomi chit pratibham devim param bhairava yoginim. Her name is Bhairava Yogini. She's the one who is always yogini, joined to Bhairava. Oh, that's a beautiful idea, Vanshika, that Chaya Sita later becomes Draupadi in the Treta Yuga. Interesting. But anyway, these are all like nuances in Indian or Puranic storytelling, right? Like these beautiful little nuances. So this nuance is important. Bhairava is Kali and Kali is Bhairava. Just like the word Gata and the word Kumbha both refer to the same entity. This is something Abhinava Gupta says in Tantra Loka. He says, Kumbha gatas cheti tathaiva banyate. Like just like the way the word Kumbha and the word Gata are both synonyms, just like that, Shiva and Shakti, or more importantly, Bhairava and Kali are synonyms. So when we worship Kali, interestingly, you've already worshipped Bhairava, but just for fun, to look at her from this angle, to appreciate this aspect of literally the same person, same being, we also do a Bhairava puja. So having done Sadā-śiva puja in the beginning, now towards the end, after worshipping Kali and her mandala retinue, we perform a Bhairava puja, which is one of my favorite moments besides the Kali puja. It's so beautiful. The dhyana mantra is so cool. He's like described as smoky in color and clad in elephant skin and like or animal skins and just a very beautiful dhyana mantra. And I love just the puja, the way that puja is set up. So anyway, that's there. And then once you finish that puja, again you worship Shiva a third time. This time as Shava Rupa Shiva. So now you worship this guy, like the one underneath, this fellow over here. And so I can't quite what do you call it? Like read this, but in the chat you can see the artist has been cited. So this is Shiva Subramaniam, who made this painting, but you'll find many like it. So I actually posted something like this, not this exact image, but something similar, where they're sitting in a funeral pyre and she's in sexual union with Bhairava and standing on top of Shiva, and that was a bit too spicy for YouTube, I'm afraid. So that was the last picture that I used as a thumbnail, and then we got swaha on YouTube. But this idea, it's very rarely that you see this depiction, but they do exist. These kinds of paintings depicting this idea is there. And often you see it in Bengal also quite a lot, this idea. Yeah, and you can see this. This is a nice art style. Beautiful ancient art style. Probably doesn't have any citation because it's probably very old. But you can see. So here, this one is more like Nepalese, more Tibetan. Definitely, this is a Bengali art style though. But you can see here, Kali in sexual union with Bhairava on top of Sadā-śiva. And Sadā-śiva here, Shava Rupa Shiva, he kind of resembles a little bit Pashupatinath. Or sorry, Pashupati, the one we were talking about earlier. But here you got three fellas. So here you got the like corpse that you're sitting on, and then you've got Sadā-śiva, and in between the corpse and Sadā-śiva, you have Ishana, Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara. So like this idea also of like when you see Lalita Tripura Sundari, her throne is. This is a whole other thing that we can talk a long time about. But this idea of like these four primordial gods, they're upholding, or the four Vedas are upholding the corpse upon which Lalita Tripura Sundari is sitting. So we can get into so much detail when we talk about corpses. In fact, traditionally, this puja is done on a corpse. Like when you do Kali Puja, traditionally you do it in the smashan, literally seated on a corpse. So in one sense, this represents the literal corpse that you would be sitting on, this guy at the very bottom. This represents the actual corpse that you're using for this sadhana. Now the question often comes up, so then do I need a corpse? Well, ideally. But where would you find such a thing? Like, where are you going to find a corpse? And I'm not endorsing that you resort to unscrupulous means for the acquisition of a corpse. I mean, you can ask your doctor friends, you can go dig around maybe, but I don't know. I would avoid that kind of thing. I can imagine you like ghoulishly waiting at a funeral, and once the casket is lowered, you wait for everyone to leave. I don't think you should do that. Like honor the laws in the countries that you're in, and you don't need a corpse because you have one handy. No, I'm not talking about your spouse. I'm talking about this very body, right? It's handy. So you don't have to go like murder your spouse and sit on them. Although I did tell Vijay, I'm like, you can have dibs. Like, first of all, make sure my skull is used ritually. Like I need somebody to be drinking wine out of it. Okay, don't waste this skull. And you're welcome to use my corpse. I told Vijaya, and vice versa. We have an agreement. So if you don't have a corpse handy, like another corpse handy, don't forget. What about this one? I don't need to go out and sit on a corpse because I'm already sitting on one. This thing is nothing but a corpse. It's nothing but a river of dissolution headed towards death. It's dead even now. Anytime it could die. Like anytime, a plane can be plucked from the air and dragged into a building, killing a bunch of people. Like anytime, our life can be snatched from us. This is what Mahakala Bhairava teaches us every single day. That don't be so sure. You could be so happily going this way, going that way, and then one car crash later, done, finished. Swaha. So like that, we have to remember, memento mori, we have to remember death. We think, oh, what is his body? It's dead already, actually. So that kind of vairagya can come. And then once you have that, then I don't have to go around and like skulk in cremation grounds waiting to catch a corpse. I myself am a corpse. So you can think like in this image, thank you for sharing this image, Meghnama. This is a good one. This is like the actual corpse. And so sometimes these two are conflated. This Sadā-śiva is conflated with the actual corpse. But you know what I love about this, you guys? This image, my God, I could do a 2-hour lecture on it and have. This image represents the trajectory of our tradition from foundations up. We start with the individual, which is you, and then that individual is in one sense the Vedas. Like these Vedas, these are the 4 Vedas. And the 4 Vedas support Shaiva Siddhanta, which is the tradition based on the 4 Vedas, which is in some ways the updated or maybe even better version of what's there in the Vedas. Then from the Shaiva Siddhanta, you get this, the Bhairava Marga, or what is called the Mantra Marga, or something. Actually, no, Shaiva Siddhanta is still within the Mantra Marga, but I mean like, Yamala traditions, Vamachara traditions, and Kaula traditions. They're all represented by Bhairava. And from those traditions emerge the ultimate revelation, the revelation of the goddess. So the deepest, most interior aspect of Shaivism is Shaktism. I don't see Shaivism and Shaktism as 2 different things. I see the Shakta revelation as the highest realization of the Shaiva. So here you see Kali emerging from Bhairava, who is founded upon Sadā-śiva, who is founded upon the 4 Vedas, who ultimately is founded upon this reality, which is nothing but a corpse, you could say, or this individual in whom the 4 become perfected. So this is also a trajectory of our whole tradition, if you can think of it that way. So these two sometimes get merged. So this Sadā-śiva or this Pashupati and this literal corpse, you can see in this other image over here. Where are we? Let me just go click into this other image. You can see there are only 2. Sorry, where are you? Where's the other image? Can you guys see the other image? Are you seeing it? Oh, you're seeing it? The other image? Yeah, you can see it? Where there's like only 3 fellas? No? I'm talking about the one where it's like Kali and Shiva and Bhairava. Oh my God, am I? Wait, maybe I'm freezing. Am I freezing? No, I see you guys moving. Oh, okay. Thank you. I just like nobody was nodding. I was like, oh my God, like, are you guys seeing it? Because it's all over the place. So anyway, you should be able to see Shiva, but Bhairava and Kali, just the 2. So this bottom Shiva, you can see it's playing the role of the corpse and Sadā-śiva. So we can just call this Śava-śiva. So we have Shiva as Bhairava and we have Shiva as Śava-śiva. Shiva as the corpse. So like we said, this body itself is the corpse, and you can see this whole thing is kind of Kundalini coded. In the Muladhara, you're seated in this corpse. And then on top of this corpse, when you're seated, you're in Samadhi. And in Samadhi, there's the perfect fusion of Shiva and Shakti. But this Shiva is now Bhairava. Bhairava is one who has attained full realization. So from Śava-śiva, from Shiva the corpse, you become Bhairava, Shiva animated as the primordial reality. And that Shiva is always in union with Shakti, who is above her. So you can think of like the Nataraja image as Shiva stepping on the dwarf of the dwarf ego, and you can think of Bhairava as being on top of that Sadā-śiva, and then you can think of Kali as being on top of even Bhairava. So then you can see a kind of trajectory of Shaivism throughout the ages, or a kind of esoterization of the revelation, or a kind of hierarchical, doxographical hierarchy even is revealed here. So you can say like Mahamudra or Dzogchen, they are at the peak, but you can't really have them unless you have foundational Buddhism. You need the Shravaka Buddhism first. Without Shravaka, without the classical teachings of the Buddha, which is sometimes called the Hinayana, sometimes disparagingly, without that Theravadan teaching of the elders, you couldn't have the Mahayana. The Mahayana is founded upon the Hinayana, but it's a higher revelation of the Hinayana, and a higher revelation of the Mahayana is the Vajrayana. And in Vajrayana, you have, of course, ritual modalities and whatnot, but you have importantly also Mahamudra and Dzogchen, arguably the most fragrant flower in the Tantric Tibetan transmission. So you can see how in different traditions, Tantric traditions, you have a hierarchy of revelation. Here in this Hindu Shaiva kind of sense, Shakti, Kali is the ultimate revelation, going beyond all the puritanical principles of the Vedas to represent a doctrine of freedom and a doctrine of theism that is far exceeding any of its prior revelations, but which could not, in one sense, stand without the prior revelations. Okay, so having said all of that, Shiva is worshipped as Śava-śiva. And there's a whole separate dhyana mantra, there's a separate set of puja mantras, there's even a separate closing hymn like that. So you have so many different versions of Shiva. Like, so to recap, just to kind of close out this discussion, we have Shiva as Pashupati, or Shiva as Sadā-śiva, the first version of Shiva that we're going to worship. Then we have Bhairava, who is worshipped later. And then after Bhairava, there's Shavarupa Shiva. So there are already 3 versions of Shiva. But wait, there's more. I'm going to argue there's actually 2 more. There are 2 more worships of Shiva that secretly happen in the puja. One is called the Banalingam puja or Varneshwara Shiva. That's kind of unique to our lineage actually, because Baneshwara Lingam is one of the lingams that we worship in Belramat, and so like it's worshipped as part of the Ramakrishna like puja tradition. We can omit that. We don't need to think about that. It's just another Shiva puja, but it's kind of cool. There are some interesting new dhyanams and there's some cool new like offering mantras like that. We can look at that also, but maybe later in some future class. But then you know what? There's also the worship of oneself, which is another kind of Shiva puja, and that happens during Bhuta Shuddhi. So just like Shiva has 5 heads, Shiva in our ritual tradition is worshipped 5 times. First as the individual, as me, Bhuta Shuddhi. Second as even this corpse upon which I upon which I sit. Both of those things. Even that is also worshipped actually. There's a mantra, Saom Sadā-śiva Mahapreta Padmasanaya Namaha. We worship this corpse during the asana stapana section. So when we do the purification of the seat, actually we worship a corpse. Make no mistake, the corpse is acknowledged, even though you're not actually sitting on a corpse in a cremation ground. You are. You are. Because this is a corpse and this is a cremation ground. So like that, that's honored. So there's already Bhuta Shuddhi, the worship of Shiva as Jiva, as the individual indwelling consciousness. But there's also Shiva as the corpse, or in some versions of this Baneshwara Shiva. Then you have Shiva as Sadā-śiva, the first Shiva, whose worship we'll discuss at length next week. And then you have Bhairava, who is worshipped after Kali, after her retinue. And then you have Shavarupa Shiva. So just as Shiva has 5 heads, so too is Shiva worshipped no less, friends, than 5 times in this Bharati, in this ritual book. And why is Shiva so prevalent? Because this is Tantric Shaivism. This whole Bharati is referencing the Tantras, and the Tantras are the Panchavaktrabhya Agamat, the revelation that have come from the 5 faces of Lord Shiva. All right, so I think we can stop there. Here's my plan. I have a cool picture that I want to show you, and I guess we'll go over it next week because we're kind of already timed for the Vijnana Bhairava. So this is a picture of all the offerings at the Palaharini Kali Puja. So I'm just going to go through with you one by one what all of these are next week to like show you how to prepare for a more elaborate worship. So these 5 offerings are called the Pancha Devata Puja offerings. So like there are 5 of them. Why? Because you have Shiva, the first of the 5 deities, and by Shiva here I mean Sadā-śiva or Pashupati. And then you have Surya, another form of Shiva. Actually, in one sense, this can also be considered Shiva. Martanda Bhairava, he's called. But just not to confuse you, Surya as in the sun. Then you have Vishnu, and then you have Agni, and then you have Durga. So Shiva, Surya, Vishnu, Agni, Durga. Not in order, but all of these 5, this plate is the Pancha Devata Puja. Then over here, look what we got. We got Guru, we've got Ganesh, so Guru Ganesh. Then we have Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, Sarada. So that's of course unique to our tradition because we're in the Ramakrishna lineage. So we worship Ramakrishna, Sarada, and Swamiji. If you wanted, you could also worship Brahmananda. But in any case, these 2 are reserved for Bhairava and Sadā-śiva. So notice, all in all, you're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 plates of food and cups of water. This is for everybody that's not Kali. Then all this stuff is for Kali, of course. So all this stuff over here, all these fruits and these sweets and these sweets and this thing and then this thing and this thing. And she even gets a little, what is it, passion fruit juice Oh my God. And it's open also? Wow, I guess she already drank it. I don't know what's going on there. No, I think they just opened it so she could drink it. Then these fruits. Oh, and you know what's cool about this picture? You can see a photo of Haridan Chakravarti, the priest at the Dakshineshwar Kali temple who awakened the Murti at Kali Mandir, Laguna Beach. So this picture was taken in Nandita Palma's house. Anyway, so you can see this is a um, anyway, and there's the Buddha over here and Kedarnath and whatnot. So anyway, like I just wanted to next week, I just wanted to show you this picture and go through it with you to show you how to like set up offerings. Now here it's already all been offered because you can see the flowers are already on it. If you see a flower on it, it means it's already been offered probably. So this is actually at the end of the puja, having offered all of these. I took a picture. But then now I'm gonna go through it with you and just like help you like set up for a more elaborate worship. However, when you see something like this, it can be very intimidating. It's like, oh my God, it's a lot of work actually with these little cups and these little plates. And Viranatha is actually kind of good with this. He has a sense for how to plate things and how to like present them. You have to develop that ability, this sort of like what's a good chef in your country? Somebody who has a cooking show. Not Jamie Oliver, right? I don't think anybody knows who Jamie Oliver is. I guess Gordon Ramsay. I can only think of British chefs. I don't know. Jamie Oliver, Gordon Ramsay. Do you have an American equivalent where like it's like a cooking show and then they like plate the foods? You know what I'm talking about? But like the plating is very important. How the foods are plated. You have to develop that culinary sense for presentation like that. And then it's good to have all of these ready ahead of time. Have them all ready and have them all under a cloth. And then when it's time to offer that, you can pull the cloth back and reveal that food and then give it. Rose. Yeah, you haven't thought of Jamie Oliver in a minute. I think he can cook you a meal in a minute, right? So he has this whole thing where he cooks very quick meals. And then I think he had this whole bit where he was trying to make like food healthier in schools. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if Bourdain is Canadian, but there's this funny video of Bourdain, like Anthony Bourdain, RIP, in a Martha Stewart, thank you. Snoop Dogg represent. Now, what is it? What's his name? Anthony Bourdain. Like he's done some crazy things in his life, right? Because he's like an adventurer. And then recently, Swami Ambikananda and Swami Bhajanananda ji were telling me about this like video they saw of Anthony Bourdain. I haven't actually myself seen it, but they told me there's this video of him in a bus in the Himalayas and like making all of those turns, in Himachal Pradesh, like how the buses kind of like make these sharp turns and this huge ravine drop to your left, and he's scared shitless. According to this report, like he's done a lot of crazy things, but there's nothing quite like going on a bus in the Himalayas. And you know what? It's really dangerous. Like people die there all the time. Like the cars go off the edge all the time. And we were just talking about how sometimes the people who live in this area, you can see them walking up the side of the mountain with car parts. And that's a very harrowing thing to see because they've gone down to the bottom there to collect the car parts from the debris. It's like maybe a car graveyard down there. And here you are in the bus wondering whether or not it's time to meet Shiva. A good time as any, I guess. So, okay, having said all of this, next week I want to take a step back a little bit and I want to talk about preparing the offerings for the Pancha Devatas. I want to talk about preparing offerings for Ganesh, Guru, Ramakrishna, Sarada, Shiva, in both his forms, and maybe also Vivekananda, like that. So I'll just say this. If you're going to do an elaborate puja, like in the one that you saw in the picture, it's good to have all of these things ahead of time and laid out. And there's certain rules too, like they shouldn't be touching one another. So the offering for one deity should not touch the offering for another deity. So having an offering plate is important where you arrange everything. These offerings should not touch the ground. Of course, the picture I showed you, they were all on the ground, but they were all on a cloth on the ground. So having a cloth, spreading out a cloth, and then putting a plate on the cloth, and then putting the offering things in the plate, and then the conversation about like silver and different kinds of material that you should use if you can, and how you should not drink out of these. Like there's a lot of conversation around like just preparing the offerings. And I think I want to have that discussion next week because now we're starting our worship proper. We're going to start with Shiva, then we'll move to Surya, then to Vishnu, then to Agni, then to Durga. And then after that, we're going to do Ramakrishna and Sarada and Vivekananda. And then after that, we're going to do some auxiliary deities. And then finally, we'll come to the worship of Kali, Bhairava, Sadā-śiva. Sorry, Shavarupa Shiva. Okay, so that's enough for now, I think. So we'll just talk about Shiva in the weeks to come. So next week, we'll do the puja prep. And the week after that, we'll start talking about Shiva puja proper. But I just want to say before I close out the class, if you go to this screen over here, let me just show you. Where are we? Okay, if you go to this screen over here and you click into Shaivism and Tantra, actually in many places we've actually over and over again done Shiva Puja. So if you click into this playlist, Shaivism and Tantra, you just scroll down a little bit. There are so many videos on Shiva Puja, at least 3, I think. Here we go. How to worship Shiva, three ways to worship Shiva and how to perform Shiva puja. And like literally all three are kind of the same. Literally because they are all with the same description. You see like the padati is here. So there's a nyasa, there's the dhyanam, the one we just chanted, dhyaya nityam mahesham rajta girinibam. There's the panchamrita puja, how to bathe Shiva with the five substances, water, milk, curd, ghee, honey. Then of course there's the panchopachara, the five item offering, and some Avrana Devata Puja, like when you worship like Nandi and others and Bhairavas and Bhavani. But also, interestingly, there's this closing prayer, which we'll go over together as well. So we learned last week that there are a few sections to puja. We learned that there is the Nyasa section. That's one section. No. And then we have the Dhyanam, which is the meditation after the Nyasa. Then you have the Panchamrita Puja or some puja like that, which is the five item worship. Then you have the auxiliary deities, and the closing prayer. So all of these are already here for you. So if you want, you can just go to like this how to perform Shiva Puja thing. I think we gave the talk sometime last year during the month of Shravana. No, I think we gave it in 2023. Yeah, so it's been a while. So you can go there if you're anxious to start worshiping Shiva. So I know that's where we are in the puja series, and you're like, oh my God, it's time to worship Shiva. Good. There are already videos, you can go and watch them. But what I'm gonna do in this series, because we're like, this is a much more serious study of puja, I'm gonna like take my time a little bit and introduce you to a few things like the Shiva Manasa hymn, from Sri Shankara. And we're gonna have a whole class on just meditation mantras for Lord Shiva. Then we'll have a whole class on the Panchamritas. This is obviously a very important part of the puja. And so that's why I'm going to really take my time, if you don't mind, discussing Shiva Puja. It's just so intricate and so beautiful. And I pray that everyone will be filled with fervor to worship Shiva in all of his various forms, never forgetting that Shiva means consciousness, and that is my very own essence nature, in which all appears like a dream. Om, may this be an offering to Maheshwara. Namo Parvati Pattaye. Har Har Mahadeva. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu. Yeah. All right.